Good morning and welcome to Ask the Expert. I'm Joe Taylor. This morning, another in the ongoing series of programs presented by the Northwest Regional Key Program for Quality Early Learning. The program, through the Northwest Institute of Research, oversees a grant from the Office of Child Development and Early Learning at the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services and the Department of Education. The goal of the program is to improve the outcomes for young children as they prepare for school. John Posa is a community partner specialist for the program, and he's here with us throughout the series. Well, good morning, John, and who do we have on the show today?
Good morning, Joe. This morning we have Ellen Galinsky, and Ellen is the president and co-founder of the Families and Work Institute in New York City, that she helped establish the field of work and family life during the time she was at Bank Street College of Education, where she was on the faculty for 25 years. Her more than 100 books and reports and 300 articles include the best-selling Mind in the Making, the 7 Essential Life Skills Every Child Needs. And we're going to be talking with Ellen about Mind in the Making. Welcome to the program, Ellen.
Thank you so much.
Well, at the Families and Work Institute, Mind in the Making is considered an unprecedented effort to share the science of children's learning with the general public, with families, and professionals who work with them. Tell me about how Mind in the Making came to be in terms of the research and its release.
I never intended to write this book. It was like Ann Tyler's Accidental Tourist, for anyone who's read that book. This is an accidental book. I was doing a series of studies of young people, a nationally representative group of young people, asking them about the issues that they face growing up. And we did one on how kids feel about their employed parents. We did another about how they see work in the future. We did another about their views, problems and solutions in terms of the violence that they face in their lives and conflict and bullying and those sorts of things. And I wanted to do one on learning. And I found that just too many kids in the middle school and high school years were turned off from learning. And every baby we know is born with a drive to learn, with a passion to learn. There's a fire in each child's eyes to figure out the world and how it works. And so my question was, what are we doing as a society to dim that fire for far too many kids? That led me to talk to parents about what they wanted to know, and they wanted to understand the research of what would help their children thrive. But they didn't want to have research says blah, 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 because as one parent put it, first you say drink red wine, and then you say don't drink red wine or eat red meat or don't eat red meat, or what did I hear on the radio this morning? Eggs for chickens who haven't been in cages. And so, how do we know what we know, was what this parent said. And that began a journey to go out and interview and film the best research across the disciplines that look at kids' development, with a question of what can we do to help children thrive? What can we do to keep that fire burning in their eyes and burning brightly? And now, 15 years later, the book came out 5 years ago, but 15 years later, it's very clear to me that there are this set of skills that emerge in children. They're called executive function skills because they're the part of the brain that pulls together your social, emotional, and cognitive capacities to pursue your goals. So that's like an executive or management functioning of the brain. And these skills, if we promote them, help children thrive now. There's pretty strong research that even a few-week intervention can help children, and it helps them thrive in the future. So that was a book that needed to be written. The research that I was seeing was incredible, and most people don't have the opportunity to travel across the different disciplines. It's like going to different countries in research land. So if you look at cognitive neuroscience, or you look at developmental research, or the development of language, or math, or the STEM sciences, or any of the fields that where people are trying to understand children's development, those fields are quite separate by and large. And I had the chance to look across these fields and begin to see the patterns.
I wonder if you could, for lay people, what are the specific 7 skills in a language that we can understand?
I know. I have a board member who said she hated the term executive function. She said it sounds like some guy in a pinstripe suit bothering around in your brain.
Yeah.
And I debated not using the word, but I ended up using the word because I think it's going to become more and more known, or the term executive function. There are a set of core skills that happen in our brain, mostly in the front part of the brain, the last part of the brain to develop. It's called the prefrontal cortex, in coordination with other parts of the brain, that help us pay attention, that help us think flexibly and change when circumstances change, that help us hold things in our memories and so that we can use them, so we can remember the information that we need so that we can use them, and use self-control so that we don't go on automatic, but we do what we need to do to achieve a goal. Executive functions are always goal-driven, and so what I found was that there were 7 skills that emerged from the research as I reviewed it over 10 years at that point. Focus and self-control, which means just what I talked about, paying attention and using self-control so that you can, it's the marshmallow test notion, so that you can see one marshmallow over there or 2 marshmallows here, and you have the self-control to realize that if you can wait for a few minutes, you'll get 2 marshmallows, but if you can't wait, you'll get 1 marshmallow.
Right.
So that's focus and self-control. Then perspective taking, and perspective taking is understanding that other people have different thoughts, feelings, likes, dislikes than you do, and really being able to read what's going on in other people. It helps kids get ready for school because they understand what their teachers might expect, and that might be different from what their parents expect. It helps them with reading because they can understand the points of view of characters in the stories. If you think about it, Peter Drucker in business called it an outside-in perspective, but it's understanding what your customers need and want as being the key to business success. So it's reduces conflict because the kids most likely to get into fights misread what someone else might be thinking or feeling and jump to false conclusions without enough evidence. So this skill is really critical. Communicating is more than literacy. It's thinking about what it is you want to say, whether it's through words or dance or art or however you want to communicate, and then understanding how it will be received so that you're having the self-control to not just blurt out anything that you might want to say, but you can take the perspective of the other person and understand how it might be heard. Again, critical. It's the skill that employers feel is missing most in the workforce. Making connections really means symbolic connections, which is understanding that symbols can stand for real things. So it's knowing that a group of objects can represent a number, or a letter can represent a sound when put together can represent a word. It's the grouping, seeing the world in categories, understanding how concepts go together. But making unusual connections is the basis of creativity. The next skill is critical thinking, and that's obvious why that's important. There's too much information in the world, and we need to figure out what's valid and what's accurate. The next skill is more than resilience. There's a lot of talk about grit and persistence and those sorts of things. This goes beyond coping with stress. It's being able to try that new hard math problem, or it's being able to go to that new place if you're an adult and figure out how to make it work for yourself, or try something new. That's a little bit scary, taking on a challenge. And then finally, being a self-directed, engaged learner. In the world where knowledge is changing so rapidly, we need to be constant learners, and we need to be self-directed in order to thrive. It's what business measures as engagement, which is critical to productivity. So I look at this from an adult and a child perspective. I'm about to do a book on teens, so I'm There's incredible new research on teens, on executive functions. So these are skills that we developed when we're young, but it's never too late.
Absolutely. And of course, when we talk about the issue at hand, children obviously are born learning, as we've mentioned. But the problem is that there are gaps that come along in life between the achievement gap and the opportunity gap. And that emerges actually in infancy and continue to widen as the children grow. What are the things that parents need to look for with their newborn, maybe even before the child is born, to be able to know how to bridge that gap?
I've just been looking at the research on the building blocks of executive function, and there's a really interesting, relatively new study that Clancy Blair and a group of his colleagues did at New York University, and they find that how parents help kids cope with stress when kids get afraid, babies, we're talking about 7-month-olds,
Right.
15-month-olds, et cetera, when they get afraid or get stressed out by something, how we help them helps them learn how to take on challenges, in a sense. If we can help build the child's own capacities, we don't take over and fix it for the child, but we help them learn how to solve a problem even when they're really little, that helps children. And another series of studies done by a woman named Stephanie Carlson at the University of Minnesota, and her colleagues looked at 3 characteristics that might be important in building these skills. And what she found is that she looked at being warm and caring and addressing the child's needs. That's very important. Because relationships are how we learn. There is no development without relationships. And 2, what she calls mind mindfulness, which is helping the baby understand not just the world around him or her, but the people around him or her. Talking about other people's minds and the baby's mind. Like, oh, you're hungry. You're crying because are you hungry or are you sleepy? Or talking about the baby as a person, which a lot of studies have found make a big difference. That's one thing that parents can do. Or what she calls autonomy support, what they call autonomy support, which is giving kids hints and clues and help in trying to solve problems, but not fixing it for them. And sometimes we swoop in. There have been a whole rash of books on overparenting these days. Sometimes we try to fix things for kids, but we're not really doing them any favors. So every child is born with a capacity to learn these skills, and we can promote them.
Yeah,
There's a fire alarm going off. Do you want me to wait for
No,
that?
No, that's okay. That's okay. Being in New York City.
Unless you're in the building and you have to evacuate, then please feel free to leave.
They're testing their equipment.
Yeah.
I had a question, and that is, the research sounds very logical and does obviously make sense. But in a busy world, not only with child care practitioners, but also busy moms, how does this information, this advice get passed down to the workaday, everyday level where parents can employ this knowledge to improve the learning capabilities of their children?
Well, and busy dads too.
Yes, absolutely.
We do research on how everybody feels a time famine. So I couldn't agree with you more. What we've done is we've translated this research in for lots of free tips. So we have, if you go on to mindinthemaking.org, there's a list of 100 books that we've picked, that are many of them the classic children's books, and they're free tips that say, when you're reading The Carrot Seed to your child, you can read it in a way that helps your child think, how would they feel if everyone discouraged you, and what would you do to keep watering that carrot seed? We also have developed what we call prescriptions for learning, which are taking the everyday problems that parents face, and instead of seeing them as behavior problems, or that kid is driving me crazy, here's an opportunity to teach a skill. So you take the fussy eater, or the child who won't sleep, or those sorts of things, and we've got about 100 tip sheets for any problem that you might have that could be helpful, and those are free and online too. And then finally, there's an app called Vroom that the Bezos Family Foundation has created, and we're partners with them. And you can download it to your phone. It's free, called Join Vroom, VROOM.org. And every day you get a tip, and the notion there is taking the time that you already have with your child, mealtime, bath time, dressing time, waiting for the bus, whatever time you have already with your child, and turning them into fun, not stressful, but opportunities to promote these kinds of skills. One main thing that's important is that back and forth interaction. Researchers have called it a lot of things. They've called it a dance. They've called it a ping pong game. They've called it a duet, a serve and return like a tennis game. But that back and forth conversation where the adult builds on and extends what the child says and does, follows the child's leads, looks at what the child is interested in, starts talking about it, asking questions, getting the child to think more about it. So it's using those everyday moments that we have with our children, not to be precious, not to stress out parents, but in fun ways that can promote these skills.
Absolutely. And of course, Mind in the Making, we actually use the program in the Northwest Regional Key and throughout the Pennsylvania Key system. We actually present it in multiple formats, and it's intended for directors of child cares who actually take it and then bring it back and actually provide it for their staff. So there's that part of it, and then there's also part of it where there are formats that allow parents, obviously, to use it as well. One of the things I noticed when I went through the program, Ellen, is, and this kind of plays on the critical thinking and taking on challenges in that arena, especially in problem solving, is the relationship with in early learning with the STEM sciences. And I hope to have a couple of researchers from Carnegie Mellon on the program who were contributed their research as part of Mind in the Making. And since STEM is such a critical area now, and we're finding that it can be applied very early on in principle, how important is that in the early years, and what are some of the things that we can do to help parents to get their children involved in the science and math principles?
Everyday math. We'll start with that. You're in the car and your child is fussy, and instead of saying, "Oh, we'll be there soon," say, "Let's count together." And I do this with my 2.5-year-old grandson. Let's count together and see how many numbers it is till we get to where we're going. You have to be close because you don't want to get to 2,000.
Right, exactly.
But and then you can say, "Oh, now we're passing this tree," or "Now we're turning at this corner," and now we're at 2020 or something like at 20 or 21. And my grandson now counts in the car if he's getting fussy and wants to get home. If you say, when we walk the dog, and then she comes back in and she always gets a dog biscuit, I say to Zay, "How many dog biscuits should she get?" And then he will tell me how many, and then I'll hold up my fingers to show how many, and then I'll break the dog biscuit into little pieces, and he gives her each one of those pieces. So he now knows what 5 means, and he's 2.5. You start with the object, and then say the number. And then keep relating it back and forth. How many people are going to be here for dinner? How many places do we need to put down at the table? Asking children, how do they know what they know? So you see a little bug crawling, and you start to ask the child, "Well, where do you think that bug lives?" And that, building on critical thinking. It's just taking those everyday experiences and using science talk or math talk and making it fun. We're not born thinking that math is horrible and we're not a math person.
Right.
But we learn that in the world, and so we can unlearn that. We don't have to pass that math, "I'm not a math person" notion on by sharing. And you talked about Bob Siegler at Carnegie Mellon,
yes.
And Bob Clark, 2 people who have done incredible research on children in science. And one of the things a really simple thing that Bob Siegler found out is if you're playing board games with your child and you're spinning a dice and there are numbers on the board game, instead of saying going forward 1, 2, if you say the number of the square that you're on, like you're on a 5, and then you get to move ahead 2, you can say 6, 7. And that helped kids learn to estimate better. It helped children learn which numbers are bigger and which numbers are smaller. Just an hour of playing games that way in an experiment that Bob Siegler and Geetha Ramani did improved children's basic math concepts incredibly.
I'd like to tell a little story that talks about the real world today. About 5 years ago, I was doing a favor for some young friends of mine, young married couple, and they had a lot of kids, and I had 2 of the kids. They were about 5 and 8 years old in my car, and we're driving back from North Carolina, and I'm saying, look over there, look at that barn, look at the tobacco field. And you know what they were doing? They were looking at their electronic devices.
Yes.
It's like, come on, there's, oh boy. I mean, that's what you run into in the real world. I don't know how you overcome that. Yeah.
I know. Well, my parents took me and my sister when we were little on a cross-country trip, and there was no such thing as iPhones and iPads then. I was coloring, and I drove my parents crazy because I said, "Call me when there's a cactus."
Yeah.
So I guess we've always done that.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
But it's certainly harder in today's age, and I think having some sort of time limits or place where you use them and places where you don't. But you can play I Spy or other games that are fun, like computer games, when you're looking at the fields as you're driving by.
Ellen, I know at one time you were the president of NAEYC. Is that correct?
That's
our
correct.
National Association for the Education of Young Children. So obviously it's a large advocacy group and does a lot of good things working in D.C., influencing policy. I know you've been away from NAEYC for a while, but tell us a little bit about how you see the future of the early childhood and education in terms of the benefits and what we need to do for our kids in the future. What's some of our number one priorities at this point?
Well, I'm left being the president of NAEYC, which is the National Association for the Education of Young Children, but I've certainly never left it. In fact, I've had 2 or 3 emails already this morning from the current executive director, where we're continuing to work together in so many different ways. This is my lemonade stand, as I call it in the book. My passion is to make sure that every child is engaged in learning. Keeps the engagement in learning that he or she is born with. I think that we don't need to have the achievement gap. We're doing everything that we can to make that happen by, as we're doing in Pennsylvania, having Mind in the Making training now for families and for both educators in the schools as well as early childhood professionals. And we're working with a healthcare system so that pediatricians, we're working with Mount Sinai, and we're going to bring it to Pennsylvania soon, but so that pediatricians learn about this incredible new research and carry it over into their practices and into the way that they talk to parents and answer their everyday questions. We're working with museums and libraries. We've just developed special training for museums and libraries where their frontline children's museums and libraries, they're frontline with children and families all of the time, and if they can promote every day, all the time learning in ways that both build content knowledge and promote these executive function skills, we think that that's really important. We're going to begin to work with home visiting in the future with a pilot project.
Ellen, I'll tell you, this is fantastic news. I just wanted to get a sense of it, but unfortunately our time is up. I wanted to thank you so much for being on the program. And will you come back?
I would love to come back, and you've had a little taste of New York City today.
Yes, we have. So it made it that much more colorful. Thank you so much, Ellen. You were a great guest.
And that's our program for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks at this same time. In the meantime, you can go online to learn more at papromiseforchildren.com. For John Posa and the Northwest Regional Key Program for Quality Early Learning, I'm Joe Taylor. Thank you for listening and have a great day.